and is often referred to as the Tug Hill Sage. Now Elwin and his wife Florence have enjoyed their camp in the northwest corner of Osceola Township for many years. Elwin is going to share with us some of his memories of Tug Hill Lumbering, the Monteola Hardwood Company, and his mill in Glenfield and the Keystone Wood Company. So what are your earliest memories of Monteola?
Monteola, I came here to work during the summer, the Monteola mill. And they had me working at that time in the broom handler room, where they used the waste for broom handles. I think I quit when school started, as I recall now. And I came back the following year. And I worked at that time all through the summer and until it quit in the fall year. And it shut down for the winter.
What did they make there, Elwin? You said you made broom handles out of the waste. What did they make out of the main part of it?
Well, they made lumber and railroad ties. They'd pile the lumber and let it season. And the railroad ties, they shipped them out about as fast as they made them. They also had a pile of wood that they had waste there. And a lot of the sawdust and that stuff they used to fire the boilers with. They had 3 at the time. But the pile of lumber, of wood, I'll get it after a while, that they had there was an amazing thing. It was quite a little bit of birch cut up in the woods. And that was, some of that was rotten hearted. And it was a white rot. And they had as high as 15 to 20,000 cord when it come shutdown time in the fall, and they sold that in different cities and like that, shipped it out by railroad cars. But when that would get wet and the humidity was right, a lot of that would look as though it was all on fire. It was, well, we call it foxfire, but it was actually a phosphorus thing, to look at it at night in the dark after a rain, it looked as though it was all on fire. Well, we lived down the track in one of the company houses, and a lot of times if it was a hot, humid night and we walk up the track, you'd see what they call foxfire. I don't know if you've ever seen it or not.
No.
But it would be sometimes a ball as big as a baseball or bigger that was floating right down over the stream that went down through there. And to watch it, it's kind of an eerie feeling because you'd see a bush the other side of it, and then you'd see the bush on your side of it. And it was kind of well, I don't know, eerie I guess is a good name for it, Sandy.
You have a picture here of the sawmill at Glenfield, of the Monteola sawmill.
Well, yes, that came here in 1914.
Well, let's take a look. Now, you want to tell us about the picture here?
Well, the picture was, now the mill came here from Newbridge. I believe it was 1927. No, it was 1918. That it came here, I believe, from Newbridge, and it was owned by the Campbells in Dexter. And that's why that a couple of the places called Camelwood up on the railroad later on. They built the Glenfield and Western Railroad in 1931. And
Who took this picture?
who took them?
Yeah, who took this picture?
A fellow by the name of Beach.
It's quite an amazing picture to get so much area in.
Well, he had a camera that would sweep the area, and he took a number of pictures, and there was one of the retorts I don't have. Tony Bumgardner had one, and Nelson probably had it when he died. His wife probably still has it. I don't know whether she still lives in Beaver Falls or not. I can find out, but I can't find out in time enough to get that other picture if she has it. To work in the Monteola Hardwood, and he was boss in the broom handle room. And he, as we had done it previous summers, we followed him until school started. He got a job for us. Next week we came over with him. And
Who else came besides you?
Huh?
Brother.
Your brother came?
My brother came besides me and my father.
Okay.
And we boarded at the hotel, Central Hotel in Glenfield. We stayed there until school started, and then we went back. My father still stayed till the mills closed up in the winter. When they haul logs until they couldn't get through the rock cut, and they usually had a few ahead, so they operated sometimes 2 or 3 weeks after that.
You mentioned the rock cut. Where is that?
That's between Houseville and Glenfield.
And that was on the old railroad.
That's right, and it blow full, so they couldn't get the snow out of there, and they couldn't get through anymore. When it comes spring, they had as soon as they could get that open, they could get up into the woods and get logs. So it acted as kind of a thorn in them. Yeah, but it was kind of a governor more than it was of anything else. New York Central built that originally, that rock cut. They were going to put the railroad up throughout along that on the next flat. But then they discovered that the snow was much less down at the foot of the hill, so they came from Lyons Falls up through there. They did build it until they got through the rock cut, and then they didn't go any farther with it there. But the Glenfield and Western, when they built that, I think it was 7 miles to Houseville, and the road was 4 miles and a half. So it had to go around quite a lot to get away from the hills, sharp hills and like that to get there.
But that, when did that railroad go in, the Glenfield Western?
Where's that spike?
Right beside you there.
It was built in 1901 and it went bankrupt in 1931.
Yeah. Can you zero in on that one?
Can you get that for
Yeah.
us?
And that's a spike like the ones that were used in the
Yes.
railroad construction.
That's right.
This is one of them.
Now, who built the railroad?
The Gould Paper Company and the Monteola Hardwood.
And they built that to get the lumber down off the hill, right?
That's right.
Now, Monteola Hardwood cut just hardwood, did they?
No, any spruce that was there, they cut too. They sold it on their land, and they sold that, the most of it, to the Gould Paper Company. They did cut some spruce and use it for lumber, I suppose. But they didn't. There was still some good-sized spruce on the thing after 1931 in spots. And I cut some of that, and I had 100 and some trees blow down with that big blowdown in 1954. And they were big spruce trees. They were taller than any other tree around, so they took the wind a little harder.
And you had bought some of that land by then?
Well, yeah, that was 150 some trees that blew down during that blowdown in 1954. But everybody had spruce to sell. Even the Georgia Gould Paper Company, they had lots of their own, but they cut it on state land and paid a small stumpage for it because it didn't have so far to haul it.
After the blowdown, you mean?
After the blowdown, yes. us. And I was in the same shape. I didn't have any road within 3 miles of it. And so I didn't bother with it. I just lay there and rot.
We built our camp out of one.
I got some of it,
Gotcha.
pulled some of it out, but then built the camp with it. That's all I built the camp.
Well, what happened to the Monteola company in Glenfield?
They sold to the Keystone Wood Chemical Lumber Corporation. And they came here in
I think you said 27, wasn't it?
1927, I believe they came here, yes. Monteola Hardwood came here from Newbridge right after World War II, or World War I. And then Keystone bought it in 1927. And the first thing I knew of them, we heard they bought it. We lived in a company house and they moved up in there with a bunch, and they started getting ready to move the house. And that was the first we knew that they were even there. And they knocked the foundation out. We lived in the house all the while they were moving it. But they moved several houses at the time. I think there was 7 that they moved out onto Blue Street from that, what we call Railroad Street. And
To make room for new construction?
that was made room for the retorts. And also there was conveyors and like that took the wood from the sawmill, the Keystone mill that is, over to the retorts.
Well, they used the same sawmill that was there?
Well, they rebuilt that too. Everything was done by belts until they bought it. And what they did, they used a separate motor for each machine. And then they put in a big electric plant there that made power for the steam power. They used steam to make the electricity. And they made it more modern a lot than Keystone did.
You mentioned the word retorts. A lot of people, I never did anyway, until you explained it to me what a retort is.
Well, it's where they put the wood, they put the wood in there to make charcoal.
Big ovens.
And
But like ovens, is it?
yes, there was a great big buildings. There was, I think they put 8 cars, 8 feet long, and they had 4-foot wood in there. And there was 8 cars that there was room for in each retort. And they used 8 of them for 11 of them for preheaters, and 11 of them to finish off the charcoal. And they saved the smoke and put it into the still house. And the still house, they made creosote, and they used it for acetic acid. And let's see,
Alcohol.
wood alcohol. And there was one other product that they called wood oil that they burned at night because it burned dirty. And they burned it in the boilers at night so the people wouldn't complain. But they had quite a setup there. They had a lot of the Keystone, they moved in there in May 7th, I think it was. And in the year from that time, the 1st of June, they were in operation. And they rebuilt the mill. They had built the railroad under the New York Central so that they could have a railroad track up under the Fisher Tract above Birmingham. And they built the conveyors over across the railroad, the New York Central, so that they could transfer the coal wood over there to burn it into charcoal. And they had a big pipe, and underneath that they brought the smoke back to the still house. They built the still house, which was 3 stories tall, and I think that I remember the ceilings were around 18 or 20 feet. So they were tall. It was a tall building.
You don't have a picture of that building, do you?
I don't know. It might be in one of these.
Let's take a look at this one here and see what this one is.
It's the still house here, and conveyor went across the New York Central. And this here came from the sawmill down here. And then it went across to the railroad and over in. And then they put this big smoke pipe to come back to the still house. And they distilled their smoke in there.
Mhm.
They had a,
Now what's this building in the center? That's the sawmill?
this is the sawmill here, and this is the logs going up into the sawmill. There was two mills, one on this side and one on that side, and they kicked the logs, whichever wanted lumber, they kicked them off from this way, and they had a kicker that kick it over the other way. So, but the logs all went up, this is the mill pond, they all went up that conveyor, and they kicked the logs either way, whichever one needed logs.
Mm-hmm.
One man handled the log, and there was men down here, as you can see, putting the logs on to that chain. And it took quite a little bit of work there. Once in a while, the log would lay up on top, and when they kicked it, tripped the logs off the flat car, if it hit some of those logs, they'd go to the bottom. They'd float until then. Well, then they'd have to take the pike pole and pull them over and get them up onto that conveyor. This here was a rossing mill over here where they rossed along some of the spruce.
Now what
Thing was?
Well, it was taking the bark off.
Uh-huh.
But this here was a smokestack. It was 20 feet in diameter at the bottom, 110 feet tall, and it was about 6 to 8 feet high, in diameter on top.
That was big.
And they built that during the winter. That is, during some of it during the winter. Well, then they had this. Down here on this side, I don't think it shows any of the pictures. Was they put a track in under the New York Central, so they could go to the cross under the New York Central and over into the Fisher Tract above Birmingham.
And they were bringing more wood in from there?
And that's still in good shape. That bridge is down here yet.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the railroad doesn't go there anymore. New York Central doesn't, but it's still in good shape. They built that in the middle of the winter. And oh, wait a minute here.
Whatever happened to the smokestack?
Smokestack was dynamited out down. Lefevre bought the little property there, and there was a liability there that he had to pay quite strong for, and so he had it dynamited.
That was after Keystone closed?
Yes.
Long
And
after.
it was a sight to see the swallows coming in there just before dark at night. You could count them by the hundreds. That is, you couldn't count that fast, but there was hundreds of them going down in there. And until that time, till they dynamited that, after the mill closed, we never had a mosquito in this area. They kept them cleaned up. But I'd go to Lowville, and even down in the basement of some of the stores there, there'd be mosquitoes. But here in Glenfield, we were free of them. But after they dynamited that, we got our share again. There was 3 boilers there when the Monteola was here, and the Keystone put in 11. So they built and that's the reason they built the stack. They had 11 big boilers in there, and that was the reason they built the stack. It's really a tremendous amount of work considering what was done. They built the railroad from Glenfield above Birmingham to the Fisher Tract, and they rebuilt the sawmill. They built the still house. They built the boiler room and put in 11 boilers, new boilers, and those had the cement had to be heated. They built the retorts at that time too during the winter, and they had to be heated a certain length of time to keep them from freezing. And they built 32 houses down this track here, and they built 5 of them were new houses, and they built a boarding house for 100 people, and they built a warehouse, and they built a company store that never opened. And the Quinn house they built, that was not figured as one of the 32, but that's on the moved it on the state road afterwards, and it's just south of the Bose's, a stucco building.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a stack for each boiler.
That's different from the other.
But this mill yard remained the same.
But it was an extensive operation even before
Yes.
Keystone came in then.
But they kept this mill yard as the same. There was car tracks that went down the line here, and they piled it on both sides of these tracks that came from the mill. And then they loaded it into, as it got dry, they loaded it into box cars and shipped it out.
Mm-hmm.
So they had quite an operation there. But this here was ties that was out there that they shipped too. But the railroad ties,
Oh,
where
yes. Mm-hmm.
they kicked them off from here and stacked them till they got ready to ship them. They sent them, they were creosoted in Rome at that time.
It looks like a pretty big operation even before Keystone started.
When you figure out what was done was the houses that were built and the rebuilding of the sawmill and the still house, the retorts, the bridge under the New York Central, and I think it was 12 or 14 miles of railroad on that side of the river, and they were also had men in the woods cutting logs, and they put spurs off the main roads up there to get to where the logs were so they could load them, and then later on they pulled those spurs up and moved them somewhere else. And they were in less than a year, just about a year's time, they were in full operation.
And how many men do you figure they had
Well,
working?
we had at Glenfield, I and Nelson Caswell were keeping the time slips for a short time. Oh, about a month, I guess it was. And there was around as high as 480 men in Glenfield itself that was working on these projects. And the mill, the railroad that went to Branningham, Conrad Shumway Sr. was keeping the time slips there, and he said there was over 200 of them on that area. So, besides the men that were in the woods cutting logs, they must have been well over 1,000. Probably more than that, maybe 1,500. I don't know. Spurs on Tug Hill, and instead of sawing the railroad ties, they hewed them. They cut a tree that was about the right size and diameter, maybe 10-12 inches, and they'd flatten it with either an adze or broad axe on 2 sides, and they used those for ties. And they had people that would cut as high as one man sometimes would hew as many as 50 a day, because they didn't have to take a lot off on each side, and they figured it was cheaper for them than it was to bring the logs to Glenfield and have them sawed and ship them back up there.
Did they work piecework or did they work by the hour?
They worked by the hour, I think. I don't really know on that, but I think it probably was by the hour. They had several camps up there at the time cutting logs and cutting them down and getting them ready to. And when the Keystone quit in 1931, they lost their market. Otherwise, this plant was the biggest one in the world at that time, of that type.
For making wood chemicals.
Yeah. And after the war was over, that is after they went bankrupt anyway, E.V. Quinn, Evans his name was, went to Russia and set up a plant the same as this one was here. I don't know how long it took him to do it, but he was over there quite a little while.
Now, the Quinn family were the ones who
He built the
owned,
mill, did this
owned
operation.
Keystone?
Yeah, in the Keystone.
You mentioned the Quinn house that's out near Bosse's.
Well,
Where did that come from?
well, they tore that down at Keystone and shipped it up here.
Keystone, Pennsylvania?
Yes, they brought it up here and rebuilt it up. Well, then after the state road was put through to Lowville on this lower level, then Leo Salmons bought that house and moved it to where it is now, and he's still living in it. There were several of those houses that are around different places. One of them is just where Lyons Falls on the right-hand side, that is from this way. And that was moved down there early one morning in one piece. And but they had to have somebody up at the top to keep raise the wires sometimes that they had to go under them. But there were several other houses that were torn down and built again, and there's several of them across the river here yet.
This is after Keystone closed?
After they went bankrupt, yes.
And why were the houses moved?
Well, the reason they were moved, the title was not clear at the time of the land, and they wouldn't settle because they had lost a little money in the deal, and they wouldn't straighten up the title. And so they decided the best thing to do was to sell the buildings as they were. They sold the buildings and the sawmill, all the equipment that was on them. In fact, they sold everything they had there. And Abe Cooper bought that. And Harold Van Brunt, who was the engineer for the plant, took the job of selling that stuff from Cooper, for Cooper. And I don't know, he had a pretty good head on him, or they wouldn't have kept that thing and did that amount of business and kept them working at that length of time. Tom White was the boss of the construction, but he was Harold Van Brunt was the engineer. And the Woods bosses, they let the job to different ones, like Frank Murphy, and that's one of them. I can't think of some of the others, but there was about 4 different jobbers up on the hill that were working there. After they got started, if they hadn't lost their market, it was really a beautiful job. They had a charcoal shed that they built too in that length of time. And they put up fire hydrants through the yard and where the houses were, and they had a pump house down by the river, so that for those hydrants. And that was another thing they built that year.
And there hadn't been hydrants there before?
No, never been any hydrants there before. And so it was a mammoth operation.
Now, why did they lose their market?
Due to the Wall
Depression.
Street.
Yeah, the stock market crash?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what happened. They lost their market. And of course, they'd spent all the money they had. If they had owned the plant previous to that time, they could have held on for a while. Well, the bondholders came and looked the thing over, and they decided to sell everything they could. And after they went, in fact, I was working for N.W. Salmons at the time, and they rented a car from him to go up on the railroad to see what there was on the hill. And they come back and they had a certain loss that they were going to let go back for taxes. And that was really quite a slap in the face as far as Glenfield was concerned too, because they figured they had things made for the rest of their life there. But didn't really work out that way. But several of the, I think there was 3, 1 or 2 of the Quinns and some of the 2 or 3 of the bondholders committed suicide.
They just couldn't take the losses, huh?
Yeah. But I think there was one